Grab your thirst for adventure and get ready. This is the Lady Overlander Radio podcast, where we ditch the pavement and embrace the wild. Each week, your hosts, Misty and Arla, bring you stories of inspiration from around the globe. Join us live Thursday evenings on Facebook and YouTube, or catch the audio version of the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other major podcast platforms. The Lady Overlander Radio podcast is presented by Midwest Adventure Outfitters and Mamoo's Camp Kitchen. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Welcome to the show. Hey, Arla. Hey, girl. Hey.
Hey, girl. Hey.
How you doing?
I'm living the dream. How are you?
You're always living the dream. That's what you say every week.
I know. I'm not changing it up, so don't even try it. I'm not doing it.
So what's new in Arkansas?
Rain, heat, and now we're going back to rain tomorrow. A lot of rain.
Summer is here.
Lot of rain. A lot of rain going on. Like,
yeah,
it's
good
an
times.
insane amount for this time of year, for us to be honest. Yeah. So it's great.
Oh, Barrel Backpacker, welcome. Thanks for watching. So we have a special guest on tonight, and we had to reschedule, of course, from last week. Lots of things were going on, but we're very excited to have Mr. Scott Brady on the show tonight. And for many of you probably already know, but Mr. Brady has he started Overland Journal, Expedition Portal. He's a seasoned traveler, been to all 7 continents, all of the wonderful things. But I'm not going to brag about him. I'm going to let him talk about himself and give a little background on.
Brag about yourself.
Brag about yourself.
The floor is yours. And a veteran. He's a veteran.
And he's a veteran.
Well, first of all, thank you both so much for allowing me to be on the podcast. It's a real honor. It's such a neat platform that you both have, and I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast through the years. So nicely done. So this is fun for me to be on the other side of the mic, I suppose. So yeah, a little backstory on me. I mean, I am a veteran. I, couldn't afford to live in Southern California as an adult, so I joined the military, and I was in the Air Force for 4 years, and I was a fireman in the Air Force. I really loved my job, but I'm a little bit too much of an entrepreneur to get stuck in the process of promotion within the government. So I wanted to kind of be able to promote at my own rate. So I did my 4 years and got out of the Air Force, and then went to college and got a business degree. And I worked in business for quite some time, and worked in higher education software before I really started to have the capability of travel. Up until that point, I either couldn't afford it or I didn't have time. But I started to have a little bit of money and a little bit of time. And that's when I began the process of traveling. First of all, just locally. I mean, I remember my first trip across El Camino del Diablo felt like an expedition to me, because I didn't know what I was doing. So I still don't know what I'm doing, but I know a little bit more now. So, but at the time, I took enough fuel. I could have probably driven to you in Arkansas. I had so much gas on board and all of the contingencies that I planned for. So I over prepared for those early trips. But eventually I started going to Mexico. And I would say that the big break for me happened when I won a race called the Outback Challenge that was held in Northern Africa. So when I won that event, it attracted sponsorship and support. So I was able to begin to monetize my passion. So I did that kind of thing for a little bit, some racing and more higher profile travel like that. And that's when I started Expedition Portal, was around that same time. And once Expedition Portal grew a little bit, then I realized I might be able to have a magazine. So I started Overland Journal pretty much right before the financial crisis. So that was quite an adventure. I mean, people think that the travels that I do overlanding are risky and adventurous, but as you both know, being an entrepreneur and having your own business is certainly a lot more risky and a lot more adventurous, it feels like most days. So yeah. And so then we started Overland Journal, and we ran those 2 businesses for 20 years until the recent acquisition by Clay and Rochelle Croft. So now Overland Journal and Expedition Portal are part of what's called the Overland Collective, which is the business that Clay and Rochelle are the majority owners of, and I'm a minority owner of that business. So that's where I am today.
So what prompted that move? What prompted you to make that change?
Well, I think the most important thing for Clay and I have known each other a long time. I mean, we've crossed the road of bones in Russia together. We crossed Greenland together. We've always been really close friends, and we always worked very closely to support each other's businesses. And one of the ways that we did that is Overland Journal and Expedition Portal never got into any kind of video other than editorial video. We would do video for YouTube. So we didn't cross over into their space. And then they never started a forum, and they never started a magazine. We always made sure that we kind of fit together and supported each other's businesses. I would send them client opportunities, and they would send us client opportunities. And we really got along well as friends and as fellow travelers. And we had produced some interesting content, like the Greenland film, which is going to be going out to theatrical release here soon. So we did projects like that. And we just always enjoyed working together, both as fellow travelers and as business people. So probably in 2018, we started talking about the idea of how we could partner as businesses. And then that migrated in recent years to how we could merge as businesses. And then ultimately, what made the most sense was for Clay and Rochelle to purchase the assets of Overland International. And the assets are the intellectual property and the brands of Overland Journal and Expedition Portal, the Overland Journal podcast. So it allowed them to acquire all of that, provide a lot of diversity in their business. Now they have lots of verticals, so it gives them lots of stability and diversity. But most importantly for the industry, it allows for all of us to be stronger in a rapidly growing space. So Clay's concern and my concern has always been that some large media company would come in and throw a bunch of money at a magazine and a website and e-commerce and all that other stuff, and we lose our ability to influence the industry in the ways that we feel are important, which is family-friendly content, real travel, real overland travel, and seeing the world and being like honoring other cultures, and maintaining, I believe, what is like the code of being a good traveler, which is respecting the land and preserving it for future generations. So Clay and I knew that we would be at risk if we stayed apart. If we were two smaller businesses, a couple times a year, someone would try to buy my business, and they were usually big companies and who knows would my employees even have an opportunity or a future. So as by Clay and I and Rochelle all coming together and figuring out how we were going to do it, we were able to make sure that all of my employees became employees of the new company. We were able to maintain the editorial integrity of Overland Journal. It's one of the things that I've probably sacrificed the most, was to make sure that we never did a single page of advertorial in that magazine in nearly 20 years. So Clay and Rochelle were committed to continuing to allow us to maintain that journalistic integrity in the magazine going forward. So that was a really important thing for me. Obviously it makes for it allows me to retire and all that other stuff, but I'm not going to be out of a job anytime soon. I've still got some stuff to do.
I was going to say, I saw that your title is still publisher, so you're still in the weeds, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. And I love what I do. And I'm so honored to be working for Rochelle. She's an incredible CEO. She is the leader that this business needs. And I would also submit that she's the leader that this industry needs as we come into this new period of growth and expansion. More now than ever, we need a strong leadership that reinforces the fact that this is about travel. It's not just about big tires and trucks and gear. This is about travel. It's about getting individuals, solo travelers, about getting women out to travel, about getting men out to travel, about getting families out to travel and see the world. And Rochelle is fully committed to that. Our whole organization is fully committed to continuing to make that be the priority. So.
Absolutely. Arla, we have a question there in the chat.
What was a place you visited where you had high expectations, but it turned out to be disappointing or not what you imagined it would be?
I love that question. And I'm trying to think of, I'm this kind of eternal optimist. So I do realize that there are places that maybe didn't quite fit what I thought it would be, or what I had hoped it would be. And I would say Central America was probably that for me, because I was expecting the countries to be more unique from each other, but they were quite similar. Culturally, they were quite similar. Geopolitically, they're very similar. The landscape is very similar. So, and of course, there are very much so differences between Costa Rica and Nicaragua, but I was expecting it to be more like South America, where when you go to Peru, it is a very different experience than when you go to Chile, for example. And it's much less so like that in Central America. I mean, there has definitely been places that, Russia is the most dangerous place I've ever traveled in my life. And it's not because of banditos. It's because everyone on the road is trying to kill you and themselves in the process. So it totally depends on where you're going. Yeah, I like that question.
Good question.
Yeah, I've been to some Caribbean islands that were a little risky to drive through as well, but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you kind of, people are always so worried when they start overlanding, especially internationally, that there's going to be bandits, or there's going to be, they're going to have to deal with some terrible bribe or whatever. And certainly there's the possibility of that. I had someone try to carjack me once, but that's in 20 years of travel around the world. So it's very, very rare that those kinds of things happen. But I will say, for the most part, the thing you have to worry about is getting into an accident or falling asleep at the wheel. A lot of overlanders have ended their trip through falling asleep at the wheel, single vehicle accidents, losing control. They build the vehicle too heavy, so then the vehicle doesn't perform properly. And when that kid, just like we would in our hometown, if a kid comes out on a bicycle, you're going to put yourself into the tree or whatever you got to do to make sure you don't hit that child. But the problem that a lot of overlanders have is that their vehicle is above payload. So it's outside of the scope of performance that the engineers worked so hard to ensure. So you have to think about, when I'm building this truck, can I still maneuver and not hit that kid or that moose or whatever else? Can you avoid an accident? And unfortunately, that ends a lot of trips for overlanders.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because one of the very first things when my husband and I started overlanding, we're friends with Eric Highland, and we had a lengthy conversation with him about Jeeps and payload capacity, and he gave us a whole spreadsheet, and he said, you guys definitely have to make sure that you're not over your payload, which at times we have been. As traveling with 3 kids, you can't fit everything into 2 vehicles and still not be over payload sometimes. But that was one of the big things that he told us, was make sure that your vehicle is still safe to operate, because your braking system, your gearing, your everything, your axles, everything is engineered for a specific payload max. Right. And unless you're doing a lot of aftermarket upgrades and a lot of additional modifications to a vehicle, you're going to exceed that payload, and it's going to end up being very dangerous.
I would agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what are some other things you think, like for somebody fresh into overlanding, that you would mention to them? And I don't want to take away from all of the great things that you've shared in your book, but what are some like high level things you could talk about?
Yeah, we can talk about as much of it as you'd like. The book it's an open book, so we can talk about as much as you'd like on the podcast. I think the key in my mind is to not focus on the vehicle or the equipment to start off. I think the most important thing to do is to sit down with your fellow travel companions, which is usually someone's family, and talk to them about what they would like to experience. I think that the biggest risk that a lot of families have is that one of the adults in the family, one of the parents, is excited about traveling around the world, And they go all in on that. They're motivated. They buy the vehicle. They're really excited to research all this stuff. And they usually are the ones that are doing the planning and the itinerary, but they never sat down and asked their daughter what she would most enjoy on a trip, or what are the things that frustrate her, or what are the things that bring her joy, or what are the things that make her comfortable. And the same thing for their son. Like, what is he most excited to learn about? And it may be that he's really into animals and he would love to find a way to give back in some of these countries and go support some biologists on the coast and do samples or testing, with turtles, or who knows. But unless you sit down and have those conversations, you don't ever know. So it feels like a lot of families are kind of drug along for the experience, as opposed to being a partner in the adventure or a teammate in the adventure. So that's one of the first steps. And then to make sure that everyone in the vehicle has a driver's license, and even those that maybe are close, are trained on how to operate the vehicle and all of the systems of the vehicle. It's the responsibility of whoever is the one that has the most passion for the overlanding. It's their responsibility to make sure everyone's trained. Because if my leg's broken, whoever's with me has got to be able to operate the truck,
right,
and get us back out to safety. So unfortunately, I think a lot of people start off with, I want to get this cool car, or I want to put all this cool gadgets on the vehicle. And here's the reality. You can drive around the world in a bone stock 200 series Land Cruiser and never modify it. Maybe put a good set of tires on it. So you can just take the car completely out of the equation when it comes to the practical considerations for overland travel. People have driven around the world in Subarus, and they've driven down to the end of Ushuaia in Honda Elements, so it can absolutely, the number of times that I've been humbled by a local in a Toyota Corolla, while I'm in a G-Wagon, low range diff locks, and then here they come, and everybody gets out and they push, and they know the road. And so I think it's easy to get caught up in the vehicle, but it's not the point of overlanding. The point of overlanding is adventure travel by car. So go have the adventure first. But yeah, have those conversations with the people you're traveling with, get training, make sure everybody knows how to operate the vehicle, get some medical training, get some training on navigation, go to an Overland Expo or go to the big thing that's coming up and get training on how to do border crossings and all that other stuff. There's a wonderful quote. It's actually like a historic phrase from the Maasai people in Kenya, in Africa. And what they say is that the traveler carries their experience on their back. The more experience you have, the less stuff you have to have with you.
Absolutely.
So I remember back, like we talked about in the beginning, me doing El Camino del Diablo, I had no experience. I had no training. I thought I knew a lot, but I didn't. So as a result, I carried all of that stuff on my back. I had all that gear. I had a trailer I was towing behind it. The roof rack was full. I was way over payload. So yeah, start off with those things, I think.
It's funny though, because Arla and I are both smiling because we've been there as well. We traveled with our 3 kids. We didn't think to sit down with them, and they were very young when we started traveling. So we didn't think to sit down and say, okay, do you guys really want to do this? We were like, we want to do this. We both just retired from the military, my husband and I, and we want to hit the road. We can't be sitting still. We kind of became part of that moving around culture that 20 years in the service does to you. And so we loaded up our kids and started full-time RVing. And then we jumped into overlanding, thanks to Pete and Carol, watching their videos. And, we just didn't look back. And as the kids got older, they started having opinions about things, they started expressing that they felt like they were kind of along for the ride. And so we tried to start including them in more of the planning and decision-making and looking for things and opportunities to find fun activities for them to participate in. And, we would do a special thing where once a week we would get a hotel room and order pizza and have a movie night. And, after a week of living in a tent.
Yeah.
So, we had to learn how to adapt and balance that. And it's a conversation Brittany Highland and I have had many times, as Caspian gets older too. Now my kids are high school age. They're at the point where they want to have that experience. So they're no longer homeschooling, and now they're in a private school, and you just have to be able to adapt to that. But, I want to give them every opportunity to have the experiences that they seek as well. Mm. And I think that you're right. Sometimes when you jump in the car as a family and you start hitting the road, you don't really think about those things to the extent that you should. And
that's great advice for sure.
Yeah. So I know that Arla and her husband travel part-time, and their daughter sometimes comes with them and sometimes she doesn't. And, that's okay. She's old enough now to stay back and give them the opportunity to go out and do some things together as a couple. And I just think you have to be really adaptable, which is kind of the whole point of overlanding, I think, as it is, Yeah,
it gives us so much confidence in life because we overcome challenges. We meet people that are different from us, and that helps us to be more open-minded. I think travel is really helpful in our growth as people. So,
absolutely. And so, another thing you were talking about was the fact that people get very nervous about traveling to other countries and very intimidated. They're afraid it's going to be dangerous or, risky, border crossings, all of those things. But a point that we brought up on the show before was if you're over in Europe, let's say, and you're watching the news about the United States, I mean, people are terrified to come to the United States. And we, I'm sure that the three of us consider the United States pretty safe. Mm-hmm. So I think it is definitely all about perspective. And I think that the one thing that travel, especially travel internationally, gives you is a more diverse and bigger perspective on things. Yeah. So you can see that, it's not any more dangerous in many other places than it is here. Would you agree with that? Or would you say that?
I do agree. In fact, it's usually safer. I think that you want to start off by going to the State Department website, and you want to think hard about going to a country that they say do not travel to. Mm-hmm. And they have a couple different levels. It'll be very in red, big banner, do not travel. Then there'll be a lot of countries that'll be in yellow, which means that there's some caution. And what that means is these are highly regional conflicts. So like when I recently traveled through Ethiopia, which was still at civil war when I was there, you just don't go to the places where they're killing each other. Right. And for the most part, it's just fine. It doesn't mean that you can't have an issue. And it was a risk that I was willing to take. And the same thing applies for Kenya. If you're on a safari in Kenya, you're going to not have any issues. It's going to be extremely safe. You're very remote. But if you travel into some regions of Kenya, they do have either robberies or they do have some terrorist activity. So you have to be mindful of where you're traveling. You have to just come into that informed. And I do work very closely with the State Department on those things. So for example, a traveler can go onto the State Department website and they can register with what's called the STEP program, STEP. And that allows the traveler to then be interacting with those local consulates and embassies, advising them of their travel plans. And I think that that's a really good idea for someone who's traveling remote. I think that that's really key. So, sorry about that. I think that that's really key to work with the State Department, advise them where you're going to be going so they know. Then they can let you know something's flaring up. Here's an FYI. So I think that that's one way to do that. It's also good to I like to walk people down what I call the fear trail. So let's say someone's concern is getting robbed in this area that they're going to go to. Do the research and find out how many tourists have been robbed in that country. And you'll be surprised that statistically, it's more dangerous than driving your car, or less dangerous than driving your car. So you'll find out that in a lot of these places, by actually going down the process and researching, okay, I feel afraid about this, which is valid. Everybody is allowed to feel whatever they're feeling. So if you're feeling afraid about a place in the world, do some research on that. Talk to other travelers who have been there. Don't talk to your mom and dad about it unless they've been there recently. Because of course a mom and the dad they're going to tell you what they saw on the news last night, and they're going to tell you that, like, what are you thinking? That's crazy. But if you talk to, like Brittany Highland's a great example. Get a hold of Brittany and ask her how it was in Ecuador, and she's going to tell you what they experienced. And so you'll have that like recent on the ground intel that you can use to make an informed decision. So go down that process of saying, this is how I feel. These are the statistics around it or the realities around it. And then what's the worst case that's going to happen? So like border crossings are very anxiety producing for overlanders that travel internationally. But what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to be stuck there a couple of days and you're going to have to figure stuff out. And you're going to have to make some phone calls, or maybe you got to go back to the other town and get some copies, or you got to, talk to the right person in charge, but it always gets worked out. Like I was detained at the Djibouti border, like at the start of Ramadan, and this place was flooded with people, travelers from Mogadishu. So like it felt dangerous to me. I was stuck there for 4 days. And it's like, I at some point I had to have a conversation with myself of like, this is going to get sorted out. It may not be sorted out exactly how you want, but you're going to be okay. You're how I impressioned myself to like say this is how I want it to go, isn't how it went. So I wasn't through the border in 15 minutes. It took me 3 days, almost 4. So, and now I have a great story. So.
Yeah. And that's the same. I mean, that's another big aspect of overlanding is you can plan all you want, but it doesn't mean that things are going to go the way that you think they're going to go. And most of the time, they're probably not.
That's right.
So
they're almost always not going to go the way that you want it to go. And that's the point of travel. That's the point of adventure travel, excuse me. So, if you have a very limited amount of time and you're going to Rome and you want to see all the sites, you're traveling like a tourist. You do want to have a tight schedule. You want to know where you're going. Because you have a limited amount of time to see a lot of things. Right. Whereas if you're trying to move through a country like an overlander and see everything from border to border, you have to allow for serendipity. You have to allow for mechanical problems that come up. That's literally, it's part of the narrative of the experience. So.
Absolutely.
Wow. Got a question for you here. What is the most bizarre or exotic food experience you had? I'm scared about that, to be honest. What was the best one and what was the worst? As I have never want this in my mouth again.
There's
things here, though.
I have a really funny one. So, and I didn't know what I was eating at the time. So I was traveling the Silk Road, and this was, quite some time ago. And I was going from Uzbekistan into Tajikistan. I had just gotten through the Tunnel of Death. It's literally called the Tunnel of Death, and I nearly died in the Tunnel of Death.
Sounds fun.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, there was a landslide, so everybody was blocked in the tunnel, and the truckers didn't shut their truck off. So you know what happens in a place without air control, like without fresh air movement, it starts to get really dangerous. So it was really bad. But so I made it through that, and then we decided we were hungry, and we had picked up this Russian hitchhiker along the way because she needed to get to this city called Dushanbe, and she spoke English, and she also spoke Russian, which most of the locals spoke. So it was a win for us to have her in the vehicle traveling through this region. So we get to a place to have food, and we order our dinner, and then at the end of it, like, they were very excited that we were there. They had never had an American in their restaurant. They were really excited to meet us and to learn about us and everything. So they gave us this little local delicacy as like a show of gratitude at the end of it. And it was this little round ball of cheese. And I took a bite. It was very salty. It was, very intense flavor. And what I found odd was that the Russian hitchhiker had said, "Oh, I'm a vegetarian," or "I'm vegan," excuse me. So, and which I was like, I think I've seen her eat like meat, stuff like that. I've never met a Russian that was a vegan.
That was your first red flag.
I'm good.
I got about halfway through this cheese ball, and then when we leave, I'm like, "What's the deal with the cheese?" And she's like, "It's the local armpit cheese." And I'm like, "No," and I'm like, She didn't have a sense of humor. I mean, she was very kind, but she didn't have a sense of humor. So I'm like, she's not just punking me right now. This is something. And I said, okay, so tell me the deal about the armpit cheese. She says, well, we're at such a high elevation and it's so dry that they can't culture cheese. So they start, like, as a starter for the cheese, they put the milk, the curds, in cheesecloth, and the host of the house, she keeps it under her armpit to keep it moist.
Oh, God.
No, thank you.
There's the worst one. I've had lots of great food around the world. I mean, just wonderful meals. Every country has its delicacy that's truly special, except for the armpit cheese. So
yeah, I feel like I'm a vegan now.
She was smart. She was very smart. So she knew.
Yeah.
But we couldn't all become vegans because I had obviously ordered something with meat in it or something. But she was very clever. So
that's funny. Yeah. Wow. So let's talk a little bit. Let's dig into a little bit more about your book. So what is the book called, first of all?
Yeah, it's called Overlanding 101 for those that are watching it on the video. Here's the cover. So that photo is taken somewhere in Tanzania near Arusha National Park. And the goal for this book was to provide kind of a manual for getting started with overlanding, with a heavy emphasis on the travel experience and encouraging people to travel more so than vehicle modifications. It's not a vehicle modification heavy volume, although there are absolutely subjects in there that cover modifications. But the main goal is, like we talked about, having those conversations with your family, kind of the ABCs, or like the basic things that you need. So when we start to travel, we need to be able to navigate, to be able to handle emergencies, which means that we need to be able to have a medical kit with us. We need to have some basic medical training. We need to be able to handle emergencies when we're remote, and we need to have some form of communication. So if that emergency, and you remember from the military, when I was in the military, we talked a lot about the cascade of events. So we're trying to mitigate the chance that something degrades quickly into something that becomes emergent. We want to catch it earlier on in that process. So one of the things that we can do is have good communication. So if we've got a way of not getting lost, that's going to help us reduce that chance of having an emergency or that cascade of events. So navigation is first, and then we want to make sure that we have a way to deal with emergencies. And then the last thing is we want to have a way to communicate, not only with our families back home, that can help people feel less anxious, but also if we have an emergency, we have a way to call and get help. And a lot of times it's something very simple, like you run out of gas. Like, you don't need a tow truck. You just need your buddy to go get a 5-gallon can and go drive back in there and meet you and fill up the tank. Or maybe you've had 2 flats and you're not able to repair the tire or the tires, and someone just needs to bring you a spare tire. So it's really important to have an effective way of communicating. Something like as simple as an inReach works. Now that you can get Starlink as the Starlink Mini, that's probably the best way for people to go nowadays, because then you could actually FaceTime your buddy who's a mechanic and say, like, oh, my engine's doing this, and they can see it and maybe suggest ways to repair it to help you through that process. So those are the most simple elements of it. After that, when you go out on your first trip, just take what you've got with you. Take what you've got in your garage. Don't go out and buy a bunch of new stuff. You don't need to go onto a website and spend a couple grand. Or borrow it from some friends. Like, borrow gear from a friend that does travel like that, or go rent it. REI has rental programs. Go rent a tent and a couple sleeping bags and see how you like it. Maybe you find, I don't really like being in a tent. I'd rather sleep inside the car. And then maybe you try that next time. So do these little local trips where you're just testing to see what works, but you can easily drive back home if the stove stops working, or you ruin the meal or whatever. You can go back home, reassess, and go back out again. So starting really simple and not spending a bunch of money on the gear is, I think, the key to it. So
sounds like you've been to our Overlanding for Beginners class.
I was gonna say, a lot of this sounds very familiar.
Yeah,
that's the same thing we tell ladies.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually something that I really admire about women overlanders, is that they tend to not overdo the gear. They tend to focus on the travel, which is the whole point of it. And it took me forever to figure that out, to where I stopped being so obsessed about the look of the truck and all of the gadgets that I had on it, and really start to focus on the travel.
Yeah. And I know that I've seen on social media and heard on different podcasts and stuff at different times that you've probably received quite a bit of flack in the past about defining overlanding compared to just going out for the weekend and camping. And people get very spun up about that conversation. Why, I don't know. But, what's that?
I think it's fair for people to have opinions on that, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that, my opinion about overlanding versus off-roading and camping is that overlanding to me is about the journey itself. It's about the experiences that you have. It's about seeing different cultures or different areas that you may not have ever experienced before, even if it's in your own country, compared to going on a difficult trail and then camping. I think there is a distinct difference there.
I would agree.
And I just don't understand why people get so upset about that. Neither one is a bad thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's usually because people feel like there's some gatekeeping going on there. But it's really just like, language is important. Like, definition is important. So it's the reason why we define terms. It's the reason why we have terms like overland, and we have terms like road trip, and we have terms like off-roading. We have terms like car camping. So I'll give a little bit of an example that might really help someone that is be frustrated by that. When someone is going out hiking, probably all three of us on this call love to hike. So, when I go out hiking, I don't say that I'm going mountaineering. I'm going for a hike. If I take a break at lunch and I go for a walk down, for a mile or so just to get out of the office, I don't say that I'm going hiking.
Right.
I'm going for a walk. It's like, it's descriptive. It's a term that is descriptive of the activity. And going hiking is definitely not mountaineering. Mountaineering, we understand what that is. That is someone attempting to get up the side of Everest. There's mountaineering that is not an expedition, and there is certainly mountaineering that is an expedition. So if it's a first ascent, or if it's in some place extremely difficult to get to and remote, like in Antarctica, if you're trying to do mountaineering in Antarctica, most likely you're doing an expedition. You're not just mountaineering. You're on a mountaineering expedition. Right. And so these are ways that we help define an activity that's been done for hundreds of years. And it's very clear what mountaineering is, what hiking is, and what going for a walk is. So it's the same in our industry. If you're going to see the world's largest ball of twine and you're in the family sedan and the goal is to go to a family reunion, you're on a road trip. And there's nothing wrong with that. Road trips are super fun. They're super fun, but you're not overlanding. You're on a road trip. So call it what it is. So it's descriptive of the activity. The next good example of that, if I take my quartermaster and I go out to Sedona and I drive Broken Arrow, which is a super fun trail. It's a little bit challenging. It's got rock ledges and shelves, and it takes me a couple hours. And then I go have lunch at the great little Thai place that I love in town. And then I drive home. I went off-roading that day. And the reason why I love to go off-roading is because it keeps my skills sharp. It helps keep me sharp, and plus it's super fun. But I don't say I went overlanding that day. I went off-roading because it's descriptive. And the same thing applies to car camping. The thing that's important for people to know is that you can overland around the world and never off-road and never camp. But you are certainly overlanding. Someone who has circumnavigated the Northern Hemisphere in a car is absolutely overlanding. They're not on a road trip because they're going to be in remote areas. They're going to be having to get help. They're doing border crossings. They're encountering other languages and cultures. So I think the definition is important. And where we've been a little bit more careful in recent years, There are some more traditional definitions of overlanding that start to talk about duration and time, where you need to be out for a month to be overlanding. And I think that that's probably not helpful to anyone. Right. I've done trips into northern Mexico across the Altar Desert. That is very, very difficult, but it only takes about 2.5 days to do it. But you are entirely self-supported. You have to carry extra fuel. It's extremely difficult. You're getting stuck and recovering. You're camping in the middle of the sand dunes. It is absolutely overlanding, but it's only a couple days long. So we're trying to be careful about anything that feels like gatekeeping to people. But I think the definitions are important. There's my 2 cents.
They are very important. And I think that just like, just the difference between off-roading and overlanding, each one has its own unique characteristics, and each one brings different challenges, right? So I don't see anything wrong with delineating that difference or, having definitions of those things. Some people disagree with that. I don't know.
The nature of the internet anymore.
Yeah.
People, we're seeing a lot more vitriol. We're seeing a lot more, if someone's doing something that maybe makes them feel jealous, or if it makes them feel insecure, it's common now for that to result in some form of hating or whatever. It's very common behavior now on the internet.
Yeah, I would agree.
So unfortunately.
Absolutely. Got another question for you. Have you run into many countries where you couldn't bring an inReach or satellite communication device? Joe's saying he couldn't bring his to India. And with the follow-up, what did you do if you couldn't bring it?
That's a really important point, and it is a factor. Even Starlink has been interesting. When I traveled across Africa, I finished that last March. When I was in Southern Africa, I could still have a Starlink. You can't have a Starlink today, like legally, like you could get in trouble.
Right.
For that. So it does, those things change quite often. India is one of the most difficult ones around that, because there's a couple things. There is a law on the books, and there is a way to legally bring one. You have to get a permit in advance. But it's very difficult to get the permit. It has to be signed off by the Minister of Tourism, or at least one of his officials. So it's difficult to get a permit to carry a satellite phone or an inReach into India. And the border guards at the border, land border, or if you come into an airport, for example, they know to look for that stuff now. And they also know that they can charge a heavy fee to let you go. So once they realize that there's a way to extract a heavy fee from tourists, then it becomes a problem. But even Ethiopia, you're not allowed to bring anything into Ethiopia, but I did bring in an inReach. So I chose to do that. But I didn't bring the Starlink. I didn't bring a sat phone. So what would you do in that situation if you were not able to bring a satellite communication device? Would you just pay for an international phone plan, or what do you recommend for people? That's the best way to do it. That's the best way to do it, is an international phone plan. And then a lot of times you can rent satellite phones within the country. So that's another option that people can do, or there can be a local that has an inReach that may let you borrow that. But fortunately, in the developing world, a lot of times they just didn't even build out the phone infrastructure. They just built out the cellular infrastructure. So it's fairly common to be able to get cellular coverage in most parts of the world. That's not true everywhere, of course, but it's pretty easy to get cell coverage nowadays.
So have you ever found yourself in a country where you got into a situation where you said, you know what, this is not worth it. Like, why am I doing this? Why do I continue to put myself in these kind of situations?
Or have you?
Yeah. Or have you?
I've had a couple of people close to me tell me that my fear switch is broken, and I don't, and it's probably true to a degree, but I think it's more that I balance risk against the fact that nobody escapes this ride alive. So you might as well, if it's something that's important to you, put the risk in that framing. So, and for me, seeing the world's important, really important to me. So I put it within that frame. So I accept a lot of risk that maybe I wouldn't otherwise, but I do things to mitigate it. Like I'm careful about how I drive. I don't go out at night. Don't go hit on the guy's girlfriend in the bar. like
that's not a good idea.
Don't do stupid stuff. Don't buy drugs in Mexico. Like if you don't do a lot of that stuff, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. So,
you should probably do that whether you're traveling or not, and not do those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Especially the driving at night thing. Good planning should prevent you from having to drive at night, except for rare occasions. I have definitely had to drive at night, but it's very rare anymore that I do that because the risks are so much higher. Road conditions are very poor. Visibility is poor. They're usually 2-lane roads. And people drive a lot with their high beams on. So it really affects night vision. People are drunk on the road. They're driving drunk. They're walking along the road drunk. You don't see animals coming out on the road. So, again, people think it's going to be the Bandito. It's not. It's probably not going to be that. Although that was the situation that happened to me. 2:00 in the morning was a carjacking, but it's that I shouldn't have been driving at 2:00 in the morning. I did a bunch of stuff wrong. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, when we were traveling full time, we always tried to set camp around 3:00. That way, if we got to an area and we couldn't find something suitable for whatever reason, we still had time and daylight to move along and find something else. And I've seen people set camp pretty late at night, and I don't like doing that at all. I like being there, getting established where I'm going to be, being aware of the surroundings that I'm in, making sure everything's good before the sun goes down, and you have to adjust.
Totally. Yeah, that's good advice.
Absolutely.
So would you give any different advice specifically to someone traveling solo compared to traveling with a group of people?
Yeah, the most important thing for solo travelers is to stay connected. So anytime that I have traveled solo and not stayed connected, like not actively reached out to other people, it's a lot more difficult. And I've had some fairly significant life changes occur from travel solo. So or solo travel, it's transformative because you get to spend a lot of time in your own head, and then you start to realize the things in your life that need to change because you're your only company, and you start to realize like, oh, I'm not okay with that part of my life and I need to change it. So I have found solo travel to be really important in that regard. So allow those things to happen. When you decide to go travel solo, or realize that it's going to change you, maybe in ways that you don't expect, probably significantly. And it may disconnect you because of that from the people that you're closest with. So people, when they travel solo, they have these significant revelations about life, or they see the world differently. And then they maybe don't connect back in with their family and friends as well when they come back after a long trip. So stay in touch with them. Send them texts and photos and ask them about their day, and maintain those relationships. So that way, when you come back, you're still connected with those that are close to you. And then you'll find people to connect with on the road. Naturally, you'll come across other solo travelers or other families that you get a chance to connect in with. I also think that practically you want to be a little bit more defined around what your boundaries are. So trust your gut. If a place does not feel right, normally that results in a conversation with your travel companions, and then they're like, yeah, I don't feel good either. But when you're alone, it's really important to trust your gut. There's a reason, like human beings have instincts that result from however eons of evolution. So there's a reason why we get not so much me, the hair on the back of my head standing up, but you definitely realize like something's not right.
Right.
Really, you absolutely have to like respect those feelings that you have. Move on, move to someplace else, get to a place that you feel safe. I think that's really important. Make sure, like you said, 3:00 is a great time. So like, don't wait too long to get camped out. Make sure you got accommodations, make sure you feel comfortable in those accommodations, make sure people know where you're at. So there's lots of ways for people to track you on your phone, people that you trust, make sure that they're tracking you on your phone, make sure they're also tracking you on your inReach, make sure that people know where you're at. And that way, if they haven't heard from you, they know at least where you were at the last time that you were seen. put an air tag on your motorcycle or in your car. So if your vehicle's stolen, there's a way to at least find out where some of that stuff is located, where your vehicle is located. You know, solo travel, it feels very dysregulating and it feels very scary because you don't have someone else on the experience with you that maybe it has your back, where you feel like someone's got your back. So that's very common for people to feel that way, and it's totally normal to feel that way.
Yeah, I think the first few times I traveled solo, I was very fearful. Now I'm aware, but not as fearful. You know, I think having that experience and getting through those first few times of doing that, not necessarily completely eases all of your fears and worries, but just makes you realize that it's not as scary as it seems.
Yeah. But that's true of everything in life. Starting a business, it's terrifying. You know, joining the military like you did, that's terrifying. Like basic training, are you kidding me? I was 19 years old. I was terrified. Yeah. You know, but everything seems super scary until you do it. And then you start to realize, like, oh, maybe it's not so bad. And then you get better at it. You learn and you get better at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Arla, do you have any additional questions or anything else from the audience that on there?
Sure. I think we got something over here. Hang on. We go back through. Got engulfed. Okay, so being asked, curious how now that new cell phones have satellite capability, backpacking the Florida Trail, you ran into a guy doing some beta testing for satellite texting. And he's wondering how countries are going to adapt to that.
Oh, that's such a fun question because I just recently connected in with T-Mobile and some of the other carriers to do some research on that for testing. How those countries control that is that it's just simply not available. So if you go to India with your iPhone, it won't. It's geo-fenced in that country, and that capability does not work. That's how Apple handles it with the iPhone. I assume that the Android does the same thing. Currently, there are countries in Europe where that works. There are most of Australia where that works, and now most of the United States where that works. Some parts of Canada as well. It gets a little sketchy in the higher latitude. There's not enough coverage yet, but that's all expanding. I mean, it's going to be a moment in time before you can buy a T-Mobile phone and you're going to have Starlink internet anywhere in the world on your phone, on your device, which is insane.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
I did just recently get the Starlink Mini and installed it on my rig, and that has been a major game changer. I'm loving it. So.
It really helps to do. Again, those boundaries are important. Like, remember that you're trying to have an experience and shut the stuff off. But also, like in your case and in my case, like we're trying to work from the road too. Like still have a job, and I need to be able to get things done. And so being able to stop for a couple hours and catch up on emails is really healthy. So
I feel like it gives me more freedom. Actually, I don't really feel like it prohibits me from having that freedom, you know, as long as, like you said, you have those boundaries, but gives me more ability and capability of moving around. So I like it.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful tool now, for sure.
So my last question for you is, if you could go back in time to when you were 18, 21 years old, right? And you could give yourself one piece of advice after all of the places you've been and all of the things you've seen, what would that piece of advice be?
If you want, I can. It's actually the last thing I included in the book. It's similar to that. It's
okay.
Kind of my lessons that I've learned the hard way. So this would be what I would send to myself, at least when it comes to overlanding. So it's called A Few Final Thoughts. So the first thing on the list is to slow down and then slow down some more. For most of my travels, I've been like a rock skipping across the surface of the lake. I've made a lot of ground, but I have not gotten very deep. So I recognize that was not only a challenge, but something that I regret in my travels, is that I didn't slow down quite a bit. Number two, sleep in sometimes. You know, maybe, there's times that I got myself so focused on the goal of getting to this place that I really wasn't kind to my body. So make sure you're getting enough sleep, make sure you're eating healthy, or as healthy as you can, given the conditions. Number 3, send postcards to your family. So just take the time to reach out to your family. It doesn't have to be a postcard. It can be a text or a phone call, but share your experience with your family. So that way, when you come back and you've really changed, that your family at least understands part of what you experienced. Number 4, stay connected to your family and friends back home, which we just talked about. Number 5, be humble on social media when you share your experiences. There's a couple things around that. Be really careful about geotagging where you're at. There's a lot of impact that can come from social media, especially folks of influence, people that have a large audience. Be careful being specific of where you're at, so places don't get loved to death. And also, it's really easy to be like, oh, this is my office today. And it makes it difficult for people to relate. So tell people how you're feeling. Tell people when you had a bad day, when you got stuck, or when you had a flat tire and you didn't have the right tools or whatever. So I think that humility is really important on social media. Make sure that you are in the photos too. So not just selfies. Make sure that somebody takes a photo of you in this place that you worked so hard to get to. Because those are our memories. When we get older in life, we want to be able to look back and see our younger self smiling back, at that place that we get to. Make great meals in camp. So take the time to fix up good food, not just packaged stuff. Stay away from the processed food. Go to the local market, buy all those fresh veggies, and make good food in camp. Say yes to that third cappuccino. That's a reminder to myself personally. I don't know if it appeals to anyone else in this call, but I don't know. I've just been in these just absolutely wonderful little cafes on a square in some country, and the world is going by. And why not just stop for a second and just take it in instead of just jumping back in the car and getting back on the road? Bring comfy chairs and good pillows. The good pillow thing is important. Everybody sleeps better with the right kind of pillow. So pack the right kind of pillow. Bring the pillow from home if you have to. It'll compress down a little bit. All right, got a couple more here. Take walks. It's so important to get away from the vehicle on foot. Number 11, you will wish you had more time. It's okay. We all do. We all wish that we had more time on our trips. So it's normal to feel like that. And number 12, the last one, travel will change you in ways you could have never imagined.
Absolutely. Excellent.
Great.
Good answer. It's like you've done this before.
Thank you.
I thought this was your first time.
Yeah.
Every day is a new day.
Absolutely. So if people want to purchase your book or find out more information about you and your stories and your travels, where can they find you on social media and such?
The book is available on Amazon. It's available even internationally. So if you've got people international that are, just hop onto a local book, go to your local bookstore, go to Barnes & Noble that's on the shelf there. So they can find the book in those spaces. And then on social media, I'm mostly on Instagram, but that's scott.a.brady on Instagram. Please reach out if there's something I can do to help you with your travels. Or scottbrady.com is my website if you want to learn more about my trips around the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being our guest tonight. We really enjoyed the conversation, and we were very happy to have you on here.
It is an absolute honor for me to be on this podcast. You guys are doing such great work, and it's so important that we have your voice in the industry. So if we can ever support in any way, please let us know.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. Great chatting.